The moment when you want to quit is the moment when you need to keep pushing. 3-year-old Kolton Mitchell lived by this quote while he was in and out of Baylie Hospital. While the doctors tried to figure out what he had, Kolton received a lot of support from inside and outside of the community. Kolton's fight was a big impact on many people.
Although he had a lot of support, he wouldn't have gotten through it all without his family and the outstanding staff at Baylie Hospital.
Kolton's fight started a little over a year ago. He caught a cold, a normal cold that's been going around, fever, cough, runny nose. And then about a month later, he caught it again and didn't seem to go away at all. It kind of lingered around, and then his runny noses turned into bloody noses, and his color started looking pale, and we thought something was wrong, but we just thought maybe it was something viral. And then we started noticing what looked like rash that turned into small, tiny bruises, and he was sleeping a lot more. His naps were turning into 4 or 5 hours. I'd have to wake him up from them. And then after his naps, he just seemed like he was still tired. And I just had a funny feeling that something just wasn't right. And he came downstairs to eat a snack, and I noticed that his skin looked a little bit more yellow, and the whites of his eyes were yellow. So as a mother, your heart sinks to your toes and you know something's not right. So I called my friend. She's a nurse, and I was asking her some questions, and she calmed me down a little bit. Of course, I was the wreck.
When I first found out my brother was sick, it was really like a hard time because we didn't know what it was going to end up like.
It was really hard on my family because we didn't know what the diagnosis was going to be. And we were just really scared for what the future was going to hold because at first we thought it was leukemia. And we later found out that it was a rare blood disease. And we didn't really know how to take that because our minds were just scrambled, and we didn't really know what to think.
His pediatrician was calling me and told me that he needs to get to Riley ER right away, that his blood work was not very good, and a lot of it was leading to leukemia. So I immediately hung up the phone, called my husband, was hysterical. We rushed him to the ER. We were there for most of the day, most of the evening. They ran a bunch of labs, a bunch of tests, and that day he had actually had a nosebleed for over 24 hours. And they told us that they were going to admit him into the oncology, hematology floor. For a lot of you that don't know what oncology is, it's the cancer floor, and hematology is for blood. They then did some more labs, and he had a blood transfusion and platelet transfusion that night. We were there for a few more days before they finally thought that they knew what was going on. So he had a liver biopsy and a bone marrow biopsy and aspiration. They did rule out leukemia, which was a relief. But the other bad part is that we found out that he had aplastic anemia, which is bone marrow failure, which is when your white blood cells, your red blood cells, and your platelets aren't producing like they're supposed to. So, which made sense with his platelets being so low. That's why his nosebleeds wouldn't stop. And we waited for a few more tests to come in, and said that his liver enzymes were sky high. Something was wrong with his liver, and that was what the yellow and the jaundice color was. And they figured out that he had autoimmune hepatitis. So they started him on a chemo regimen, which was to help basically shut down his bone marrow, what was left, and try to reboot it to see if that would help. And it didn't help. His liver was getting worse, he was getting sicker. So they then went forward with a steroid, which was a high-dose steroid. He gained a lot of weight. He had to take a lot of other medicines to help with blood pressure as it was going high. He just didn't seem to get any better, so they had to start him on another chemo, and he got very sick with that. Nothing was changing. They knew that something else was wrong with him, but they just weren't sure what exactly. He had four of 5 markers that they were looking for another disease, and they just couldn't say that he had it right then because he didn't have 5 of the 5 markers, which later on we found out he has HLH. HLH is when it's a cancer-like disease where your white blood cells attack your red blood cells until basically it could kill you. He started going downhill. The chemo that they were giving him wasn't working. They had then discussed him possibly having a bone marrow transplant. He needed this bone marrow transplant to save his life. There was no other option. All the treatments weren't working.
I had to take a blood test to see if I was a match for his bone marrow donor, and it took a while for them to get the results, but we found out I wasn't. I was 25%, but we did find one, and he's overseas, so that's good.
Kolton had his bone marrow transplant on July 18th. He had to start therapy to get a lot stronger. Kolton was finally starting to feel better.
He did really well after the transplant. He did better than what they expected. We had ICU doctors had come in before he had the transplant, and his stem cell doctor had also warned us that things could get pretty bad, to expect the worst. That was hard to hear, that we could lose him to try to save his life. That was when he gets done growing, he may have to have a hip replacement. So he's currently in physical therapy right now to try to get his strength back, because at one point he was not walking at all. So there was probably months where he did not walk.
When Kolton was first released from Riley, we were all ecstatic. We couldn't wait for him to come home because he rounded third base and he was on his way home. And it was just another step in the right direction for him to continue his recovery process and get better and fully heal from his disease. And me and Kiera were excited because it means we could play with our little brother again and do the things that he loved to do and all the things that we love to do with him. You could definitely tell that Kolton was ready to come home because he was getting really frustrated with all the doctors, and the doctors picking at his line and giving him blood and making sure all his vitals were okay. Our family received tremendous support from people of Whiteland. They cooked dinners for us. They chipped in on fundraisers. We held a lot of fundraisers trying to raise money for Kolton's hospital bills. And the best part was when Andrew Luck came to meet Kolton. That was probably one of the most exciting parts. Along with Andrew Luck, a couple of Indians players came to see him as well, and that was pretty exciting.
It was very difficult for me and my brother because it was just a rough time. Like, we didn't know if he was gonna get better. The first time we saw him in the hospital was on Easter, and we were really excited because we haven't seen him. We didn't get to see him for like 2 months after he was in the hospital. So it was really exciting, and it was hard seeing him at the hospital because he was so sick and we didn't like to see him that way. We wanted him to get better instantly.